Hey guys, Charlie Murphy here, recording another session of 1-2 No Limit 6 Max regular tables on Ignition. Our games are up and running, so let's jump right in. Got a middle position open, a button flat. We're going to play 3-bet or fold from the small blind. We're going to 3-bet more or less the same range we would without that button cold caller out there for this particular size. We're going to be 3-betting about 8.5% of hands. Suited broadways like Queen Jack are going to be in there. Probably pocket pairs 8 or better, Ace King, Ace Queen. A couple of suited wheel aces. Lower right-hand table, cutoff open. We're on the button. We're going to 3-bet pretty aggressively, about 13% range, including suited nines like Queen 9 suited. Upper left-hand table, we're going to open King 10 offsuit from the button. That's a very standard open. In the lower right-hand table, we're on the button. We're facing a 2x raise first in, from the button, rather. We're on the big blind. We're going to go ahead and defend in the sixes for a flat call. No need to 3-bet a pair that small. Against a larger sizing like a 3x open, we're a bit more incentivized to 3-bet and less inclined to call. And so we might 3-bet sixes against a little bit larger open as we win a bit more money when the 3-bet gets through pre-flop. For the price that we're being offered, it's fine to just call sixes against the 2.5x open. And then against that small flop bet, you've got no choice but to go ahead and check call. Rather check and try to induce a bluff from random high cards than value bet and try to get peeled off by ace high or a worse pair. And he bets very, very large. This actually gets very interesting, as I was planning to bluff catch here, but against that 3x size. And let me take a look and think about this for a minute. That sizing tends to be overbluffed, along with the fact that he's on the button. Turn pairing card doesn't change too much, and a bet check bet line tends to be about equally bluffed. Given the formation that I'm going to go ahead and hero call this. If you wanted to be more conservative and fold, I don't hate it, but I think it's okay to call in this formation. And he was trapping with the full house. A lot of players in the player pool will use those large river bets just to bully you off so much of your range, so I'm starting to call them down a bit more often. Upper right-hand table, we faced a cutoff raise first in. We were on the button. We go ahead and 3-bet with our sevens. However, once we get 4-bet, I'm pretty sure we're just going to go ahead and get out of here. Maybe if the pool was sufficiently aggressive, or we were going to play as if we were against a solver, we might go ahead and flat call this. Although he's a bit shorter too, so less inclined to call with a pocket pair. I'm going to go ahead and fold that one. Lower right-hand table, we open King 8 from the button. That's a pretty standard open, but near the bottom of our standard range if we're not expanding based on the blind's tendencies. And we'll open Ace Queen from the cutoff on the lower right-hand table. 9-8 suited is probably a little bit too loose to open as a standard from the under the gun position, the upper left-hand table. And we've got a 10-9-6 two-tone board. Solver would not go ahead and bet this small, but I still like to, as I'm just not getting check raised all that much. I do have backdoor spades, backdoor ace of spades, which makes me a bit more inclined to call. I can pick up some backdoor straight draws, such as on that card. Now I can have 10 sixes, you know, kings, tens, nines, sixes for all the sets. I can have all combos of queen, jack. I can have 7, 8 suited. He should 3-bet some of those either pre-flop or on the flop. I think this is a good time to go ahead and start over-betting. You know, I'm also not trying to bet too many one-pair hands. Maybe you know, ace, king, ace, queen, or I'm sorry, ace, king, king, queen, king, jack type hands at the most. Queens are worse. I'm happy to check back. So I think overbet is probably the way to go in this particular scenario. You know, I can rep the nut flush on a third spade with my ace high blocker. You know, the jack makes me the nut straight. Didn't work, got check raised all in, but I think it's a defensible play. And this guy is smacking me around so far, check raising me off my overbets, getting me to hero call big overbets when I've got, you know, a bluff catcher and he's got the nuts. Let's see if we can turn the tables on him at some point here. Lower right-hand table, we've got 7-6 offsuit, blind on blind. That's probably at the bottom of our standard open range here, though we could certainly expand against a big blind that's been pretty nitty and passive thus far. Upper left-hand table, we complete the small blind with a player who either limped. Yeah, I guess he limped. He didn't post with Jack-8 suited. We're going to check range, lower right-hand table on 10-6-5 out of position. Upper left-hand table, flop checks through. Now we've got a small 2-pair. We're going to go ahead and start betting that. We're going to keep checking to the turn with the third pair on the open-ended straight draw on the lower right-hand table. Lower left-hand table, we open pocket eights under the gun for a 2.5x open. That's pretty standard. We face essentially a min raise in position. We're going to go ahead and call that just because of the very small sizing. We're going to go ahead and value bet the river now on the lower right-hand table with that 4 to the straight. And we're going to go ahead and call this raise with the 2-pair against that in-position player that limps, checks back the flop, and then makes a smallish turn raise against our turn lead. Upper right-hand table, we're going to open ace-queen from the cutoff. We are going to call down with our 2-pair here, getting such a good price. You could have straights or better 2-pairs. We could actually be doing this with some kind of worse king in some cases even. And the price is just too good. The player that's limping and making odd raise sizes probably has all kinds of nonsense in his range. I think we just have to go ahead and call. No merit in raising, and I don't want to fold, so we'll call. We'll check range with the player in position to us on the upper right-hand table. We're going to go ahead and tag this guy as a rec on the upper left-hand table, given that he limped jacks pre-flop. And we're going to fold the 8s on the lower left-hand table. And that 3-bet pot. We're going to open king-queen in the upper left-hand table. In the upper right-hand table, we've got the gut shot and the nut flush draw. We're going to go ahead and call that. With the player behind us, I'd probably be calling a lot of my continue range, my sets, my good one pairs, my flushes for deception. So my range is protected from this player that's behind me. I can go ahead and raise or overbet the river depending on what comes in. That's a pretty good card, and that now we only lose to flushes. We've got the 4 to the straight along with the actual nut card, so we actually beat any queen X that could call us down here. Upper left-hand table, we're going to open Jack Queen offsuit from the cutoff. I was going to bet if this checked me, and I was probably going to use a pot size bet on that 4 straight run out. However, against a half pot lead, possible flush shot there, 2 players in the pot, I don't think there's a ton of merit in raising. I think I scare off too much queen X and get myself up against too many smaller flushes. I'm content to call this, maybe even get overcalled by a queen from the player behind me. I think it's much better to call as opposed to raise. Yeah, and we were against a smaller flush. We're going to open ace-king offsuit from middle position. The overcalling player had king-queen, so I did in fact induce an overcall from a worse hand. It was just a question of running into the better hand that had us both beat in the first place. I think a raise probably forces that player out of the pot, whether or not we're good against the player that led. I think we can go ahead and tag this guy as a wreck for playing a hand like 10-5 suited and for having pretty funky preflop stats. We'll open ace-king from under the gun. Upper left-hand table, that player that limped the jacks now opens the button 3x. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet this player with the pocket kings, of course. We're going to have a bit tighter than typical range, as I've seen this guy limping some. So I'm probably only going to be 3-betting him something like 10 or 11% instead of more like 15% as a standard. But of course, we're going to be 3-betting the pocket kings. Upper right-hand table gets some weird action. A middle position player that's kind of shorter, he goes ahead and calls, and then a player behind that squeezes, but only a min raise. I'm going to go ahead and 4-bet this to get this in. I think I'm just going to continue playing a pretty standard queens plus ace-king to 4-bet and call off with some 4-bet bluffs mixed in as well. We can use a nice small sizing with the small amounts of money out there. Okay, now that we've got top pair on ace-9-7 board, we're going to go ahead and range bet that small. You know, our pocket aces, ace-king, and maybe ace-queen bluff is in great shape. The hands like queens, you know, queens and kings are lesser so. I suppose I probably want to have some checks in my range to protect the queens and the kings. I think my ace-queen preflop bluff would probably function well for that. I think in this here, with about a 1.5 stack pot ratio left and a very dry board, I want to go ahead and use a small bet, force weaker aces or middling pairs to kind of come along. There's not a whole lot in the way of draws I'm concerned about charging. You know, and I just want to put him in a spot where he has to keep calling so wide, even though he's never really going to outdraw my hand because he's drawing so thin with weaker hands. You know, and still gives me a chance to get this money in by the river. I can bet probably, you know, about an 80% pot bet all in on the river once we get there. He jams all in. We're just obviously going to go ahead and call off with ace-king. You know, if I had bet ace-queen on the turn, you know, I would call that. I'm sure my aces would most likely be trapped just because we have the board locked down so heavily. We'll go ahead and call off. He's sitting there on 9-10, so the small bet induced a spazzy action from him where he raised, and we pick up a stack where we really have no business even being in that pot against that guy, but we'll gladly take it. When I say we have no business, I mean not based on our play, based on his play. His preflop 3-bet is somewhat defensible if he uses an appropriate size, though I do think it's too loose. But then going ahead and calling the 4-bet and that turn action is just not something you want to do. If you really think I'm bluffing or have a hand I can be folded off of, he's going to be a lot better off to just flat my turn bet and evaluate on the river. He maybe even turn his hand into a bluff on the river if I go ahead and check. But I think just raising all in right there is not great. You know, the hands that I'm going to be inclined to fold also aren't betting the turn very heavily. My pocket kings and pocket queens are mostly checking that turn. So I do not like his play. The later in the hand we get, the less I like his play. fold against the button open from the small blind with 3 deuce. It's just too weak to be 3-betting, and we're really not calling anything. As that size gets smaller, I mean, that wasn't a min raise, it was a 2 1/4 raise first in. As that size gets smaller, you can theoretically start having some small blind flats. In practice, I don't really mess with it too much. I don't really see too many bet sizes in my game smaller than 2.5x. There's the occasional regs that min raise, but for the most part, I just play the 3-bet or fold. Lower right-hand table, the button min raises first in. We're in the big blind. When we face these min raises, I actually get a lot tighter with my 3-bets in the big blind, but cold call a ton more because the price is so good. That said, a hand like King Queen suited is still going to be in my 3-bet range. I'm probably 3-betting something like 12% there. I might be more like 15% against the 3x open, 14% to get against the 2.5x open. So I do get more reserved with the 3-bets as that size gets smaller because I pick up less pre-flop when they get through. But I'm still also 3-betting fundamentally sound range with lots of big pairs or big suited connectors. We're not going to expand our range with the King 6 offsuit because this player's been active. If he was nitty in the blinds, I would probably go ahead and expand with that. It's not too far outside my standard open range. This guy, he's been pretty active so far through the first couple of orbits, so I'm not going to think he's particularly loose and start trying to steal from him. And here we are on the upper right-hand table against a player who was a bit spazzy beforehand. We have pocket aces on the button. We raise first in. We get 3-bet small. We're, of course, going to go ahead and 4-bet. For this small 3-bet size, and this deep stacks, I'm probably only going to be 4-betting here for value with kings, aces, and ace-king suited. I think I would just take a flop with my queens and ace-king offsuit and just play with that deep stack behind me. With the aces, I want to go ahead and just start getting some money in. And now we face a check to us on King 3-3 Rainbow. That's a pretty good board for us. We only lose to some kind of weird ace-3 suited type hand that flats, of which we block to some extent, or if he has pocket kings. And we're not too worried even about a hand like King Queen, which in theory is 2-pair, but we have it counterfeited with our aces and threes instead. So I'm happy to keep betting this and assume my hand is pretty good, especially given that this guy got awfully spazzy in the past. If I want to see here, if I use about a half-pot bet that's going to have me at about 115 on the river, I think I want to use more like a 70% bet that's going to have me sitting about 135 on the river with about 120 effective. I think that's going to be the way to go here, sizing-wise. He goes ahead and just keeps check calling. I think given what I saw this guy do before, I mean, could I be running into a hand like queens or kings or whatever that's been trapping me, or some kind of 3x? Of course, but can he get sticky in hero with some kind of king, especially king-queen? Yes, he can. I think I want to get my value. I want to go ahead and shove this guy all in here with my aces and threes. We jam. The fact that he doesn't snap call me is already a good sign, as any of the hands that beat me are just waiting to trap and get the money in the pot, unless he's slow rolling, which I also kind of respect. Let's see what he does. Lower right-hand table, we face a min raise on the button. We can go ahead and defend the min raise with 7-6 offsuit. We get called down. We stack this guy again. He had king-queen. He's thinking he beats ace-king, which is not terrible logic. I don't know if I would play ace-king that exact same way. I don't know if I would try to get all those, all 3 streets, all 200 blinds worth of value with ace-king, especially when the queen peels and king-queen now beats that particular hand. But it's not a terrible call-down hand right there. It really only loses to kings, queens, if I 4-bet those pre-flop, or pocket aces, and it does beat ace-king, which could conceivably play that way for value. So I don't hate his call down, and I certainly like it when I have aces. Lower right-hand table, I'm gonna swap this table out. It seems kind of reg heavy so far. The buttons raise first in for 2.5x. We're going to 3-bet about 15% from the small blind, including ace-queen offsuit. And we're going to open that table again with ace-deuce suited on the button. And one more time on that table, ace-10 offsuit from the cutoff. Upper right-hand table, we're also going to be opening king-10 suited from the cutoff. That player that limped the pocket jack's hand in the upper left-hand table, I'm going to tag him more as a questionable fish or weak reg, because he did limp, did play those jacks really funky, but he does have some pretty tight pre-flop, non-fishy type stats, 17-13. He seems more like a weak nitty reg than a true fish. Blind on blind from the short stack, we face a 3x open. We're going to go ahead and defend with Jack 10. I probably defend a bit tighter there just because there's less implied odds. I wouldn't be calling with my, middling offsuit connector as a hand like, 8-7 offsuit kind of thing. Hand like Jack 10 I think is still good enough to go ahead and defend though. We're not going to deviate too far from a standard defense range just because he's shorter, but we will dump some of the hands that require deeper stacks and implied odds to really be worthwhile. When he checks to me, I'm going to go ahead and stab for half pot with my top 2. I'd probably be stabbing, any kind of ace-jack or better type hand, or actually even queen jack. I'd probably be stabbing not just top pair, top kicker. Most of my top pairs are any better hand than that. 9x draws. I think my king queen that would mostly be in there pre-flop could also be betting that flop. And I'd be checking back lots of the middling pairs and stuff with no real draw equity. Decide how I want to play this on a later street. Turn is a bad card for my hand. I would keep betting my straights and probably keep betting my king queen would be close because I don't want to bet and get raised off of that. Now that I ran out the straight on the board, I am going to go ahead and just try to fold him off a chop. I'm going to just go ahead and put him all in for about 1.7, 1.8x pot kind of thing. If I've got the queen, I'm doing the same thing here. And force him to call off and overbet all in just to try to chop. That's okay too. I'm not that worried about a queen when he double checks. If he's got a queen, he should be betting at a very high frequency to force me to call off my money on that river with a chop when I can otherwise check a lot of chops back. His river call is not terrible because I'm going to, I either play the board or have a queen to have him beat, and I don't have a queen all that much, so it's mostly a chop, but he's still risking an awful lot just to chop what's in the middle. So some players will get, fish less so. Fish don't believe that you beat the board as frequently, and they tend to call you down. Reg-type players get a bit more worried that they're risking too much money just for a chop and let the pot go. From what I've seen anecdotally, I guess I don't have data on that, but that's been the impression I've seen. I still think it's worth doing that, just because you're not going to run into a queen where you screw yourself over and and end up running into a trap all that often. And you do pick up that pot. The other half of that should be chop pot a decent bit of the time, which there's value in that. Lower right-hand table, we're going to open ace-queen offsuit from the button. And we're going to open ace-deuce suited from the cutoff again on the lower right-hand table. This guy seems like a pretty clear rec, playing 50-25 over 12 hands and playing on a 30 blind stack. Family pot going 4-way. We're out of position to at least one player, so we're going to be going ahead to check our entire range. Even if I were going to be mixing in bets here, which is certainly reasonable, I wouldn't be betting ace-deuce with the backdoor flush draw in that spot. I'd be betting very, very tightly given the 3 other players in that pot. This guy's been a bit more tight and reserved and passive. He bets into us 2/3 on the turn with all those players out there. I don't believe this is particularly weak. However, it's a little bit too nitty to go fold in top pair with an ace right there thus far. I can evaluate on the river based on what he does. I'll gladly check it back and show my ace down, though. And, okay, he was doing that with a 9, which I'd probably even like a flop lead, as weird as that is, better than betting out on the ace turn that one of these other 3 players is very likely to have. It's also a spot where you're probably not value betting against too many worse hands. I guess a couple of draws that check back the flop, but you're going to be betting into an ace that's going to call you down almost always a very high percentage of the time. I don't like the turn play from his perspective right there. But as we discussed earlier, we think he's probably kind of a weaker reg, given that he's limped and playing some weird, somewhat passive pre-flop type stats. Lower left-hand table, we have a button limp. We isolate or raise up from the blinds, to some extent, but not a hand like ace-deuce suited. I'm content to just check that one in and take a flop. I want to raise my bigger aces like ace-9 suited plus, maybe ace-10 offsuit plus instead. Let the smaller aces play in a smaller pot. And we'll check range out of position after we check it in from the big blind on the ace-5 rainbow board. Turn is a king of spades. We're going to start stabbing at this heavily after everyone checked the flop. We, of course, happen to have trips, so we're happy to be betting that one for value, try to get called by king X or some kind of spade draw. We get quickly called by the button that limped. Now let's see here. The lower left-hand table, we're going to open queen-jack, blind on blind. Now the only question over here is, do I value bet to try to get value from the king, or do I check to try to induce from a bluff? I'm not particularly sure. Given his quick call on the turn, I think he's more likely to have some kind of king X hand than I think he is to have some kind of draw. These double paired boards, I also like to bet pot. I either have it or I don't. I'm going to go ahead and bet pot with my full house and hope he just heroes me with the king. Looks like that's exactly what happened. Yeah, he had king 6. So my turn read, just based on the timing tell and some range composition, he probably has a lot of kings. He may not have quite as many particular spade draws. Seemed to work out. Of course, he could have easily just had spades. I could have been wrong. He could have folded, and I wouldn't have got the value rather than inducing. I think it's pretty close, but there was some reasoning for my decision, and it happened to work out, so I'm pretty happy about that. Lower right-hand table, we checked range blind on Jack 9-3. We faced that small 1/3 bet. Against that 1/3 bet, I start check raising a more wide and more mergy range. So a weakish top pair, a top pair third kicker hand can be a reasonable check raise in this spot. Upper right-hand table, get a 3x open from middle position with a cold collar. King 10 I'd probably fold even without the cold collar in there, even without accounting for these weird stack situations going on. I get even tighter with the overcaller in play, so I'm going to go ahead and fold that. Upper left-hand table, we can open blind on blind with king deuce suited. I'm going to go ahead and tag both of these short players as recreationals, as it's probably pretty obvious that they are. This other guy's been cold calling and limping as well. Upper left-hand table, we'll check range on Jack 6-3 two-tone. Now that we pick up the flush draw, we're going to start betting. I often use the small bets, but I will use some overbets in these spots as well. I like to use the overbets for big hands or big draws. A second nut flush draw with an overcard's a pretty big draw that's going to be able to allow me to win a bigger pot if the club comes in on the river. I'm content blasting that one a bit larger. I could have Jacks 8, 6s, 3s here, Jack 8, Jack 6 suited, 8-6 suited. I could hit, and the overpairs, ace jack, king jack, queen jack type hands as well. So there's a lot of good stuff in my range. On the river, I do want to keep betting. I don't want to surrender that. I'm trying to decide what sort of sizing I want to use. I'd much rather overbet with a diamond. However, I don't know that a small bet folds out an 8 or a jack. In fact, I can't imagine it does very often. I think I'm actually going to surrender this just because I feel like so much of his continue range is still going to call on this river. The Jack X will still call for the most part, except maybe if I overbet him. The 8X is going to call even if I overbet in most cases. If he trapped a real strong hand, like he happens to have a flush now, or he traps some kind of full house, that's obviously calling, so I don't want to overbet. I think I'd probably be jamming with my diamond flushes. I'd be jamming with my, I'd be jamming with 6s and 3s full. I think I could bet smaller with trip 8s or quad 8s. I could bet smaller with Jack X, and I could overbet bluff, some hands with good removal to the flush, I feel like. And I end up showing down king high for the victory, so I will take that as well. I got to see what happened there. I was basically surrendering that pot. I was against 4-5 with the club that checked back the river. He really needs to bluff that hand after I just checked to him and surrender. I think that's probably pretty poor play on his part. I'm going to go ahead and open the button That's on the cusp of being standard open. Maybe it's slightly light on the upper left-hand table, but the small blind seems to be kind of fishy based on what we just saw. And we don't know too much about the big blind. This hand's pretty close anyway, so I think it's okay to expand your range if you even want to call it that. I typically don't open every single offsuit ace from the button as a standard, so a few of them might be folded, which is why I say that might be an expansion. But it's pretty close to a standard open, if not in there for you anyway. Upper right-hand table, we're going to open ace-10 offsuit from middle position. I'm not sure why I've got this guy tagged as a fish. I forget why I would have tagged him, but he doesn't have any limps and his preflop stats are pretty tight, so I'm not sure where that came from. I'm going to go ahead and switch him to suspected fish or weaker reg type tag. Just to remember I had him tagged for some reason and see if he does anything else that jumps out at me, as I really don't know why he has that tag on him right now. Oh, he's the player that had that 10-5 suited flush, and that's not the end of the world. Upper right-hand table, we checked range after raising first in on the King 8-7 two-tone board. When the 6 peels on the turn, we want to go ahead and start stabbing because he checked back. We do have a gut shot and an overcar. We can probably keep bluffing the river. He probably doesn't have too much King X in his range that checks back. We block straights. We don't block flush draws. I think there's a lot of reason to be bluffing with this hand. When I say we don't block flush draws, that means as long as the flush bricks, that's much more incentive to follow through on the river, as it's an auto fold that he could certainly have when we go ahead and bet. Now that we face this raise, he's repping really either 6x or 9-10, or 6-6s rather, a set of 6s or 9-10 that didn't bet the flop. There'd be some reason to actually go ahead and 3-bet this just because we block the straight. I think I'd like it better with better removal to a king, or better removal to a 6. Not that I would have a hand like 6-9 here, but I think if I had a hand like maybe like Queen 9 that blocks both, more of the straights and more of the straight draws, as well as blocking King Queen, I think I might go ahead and 3-bet this as a bluff. I think I can just go ahead and give up the ace-10. I don't want to start doing that too wild. This player's been aggressive, which is another thing that would lean towards finding some 3-bet bluffs there in that spot. But I don't want to get too far out of line there and start doing it with ace-10 offsuit. I think I'd like a bit better removal, make it harder for him to have legitimate hands. I think I would do that if I had Queen 9, as I've got an open-ended straight draw to bail me out. I block 9-10. And if he has 9-5 for some reason for the straight, to whatever extent he has that, I do block that as well, though that probably shouldn't be a significant portion of his range. And I block King-Queen, so I block the most reasonable top pair that he could have if for some reason you check that back. So I think Queen 9 would be a good hand to use there as a 3-bet bluff. And if the player was nitty and passive and I didn't think he had the ability to sort of put moves on you in that spot, I would just go ahead and fold, as that, that line is not very heavily raised. It's under-raised pretty dramatically by the player pool as a whole. Part of why I'm considering doing this is just that this player has been so aggressive. 45-32 over 31 hands with a 62% aggression frequency. That's a guy that's getting in there and taking jabs at you and making moves. There's just no other way to get his stats and his aggression frequency that high unless he's doing that. So that means he's got things that will lay down and fold to that 3-bet. I, of course, can have 9-10, the various sets from checking the range back there. So it's not just a pure bluff on my part. I do have legitimate value hands to go ahead and 3-bet, which I would want to 3-bet there as well. Lower right-hand table, we're going to 3-bet the cutoff open with king-queen offsuit. We're going to raise then the button in the upper left-hand table with ace-4. That lower right-hand table, we're probably going to 3-bet a bit tighter than I would as a standard just because this player has been on the tighter side so far. I might tighten my range up to more like 10%, more like a cutoff or more like a button response for his middle position as opposed to cutoff. But either way, I'm going to have king-queen offsuit in that range and 3-bet him with. So it doesn't change my approach with the particular hand that I'm holding, just changes my approach with the range as a whole. Lower left-hand table, got an under-the-gun limper. I'm in the cutoff. I would open this hand from the cutoff. It'd be towards the bottom of my cutoff opening range if the pot were unopened. Against the limper, I'm going to isolate with the tighter range, probably more like my middle position open range, of which 10-7 suited is not a part of, so I'll go ahead and fold that one. If you wanted to say that this player playing 31-6 with limps pre-flop is just going to make so many mistakes, and these other players haven't been that aggressive with their 3-betting and re-stealing so far pre-flop, and you said you wanted to expand your range, get really wide, and include that hand, I guess I could listen to that. There's some argument for it. I think it's a bit on the loose side for my taste, but if, you could talk me into it based on some of those other factors I threw out there as well. Upper right-hand table, blind down, blind raise. We're facing a 3x open. Really not much to do except go ahead and just call with the ace-7 offsuit. You can 3-bet a couple of offsuited aces just so you have a few of those in your range, a smattering of hands all over the board. But I think ace-7 probably plays just fine as a call. I don't really fold too much better ace-x or better pairs by bluffing. I do have a gut shot, but it's a gut shot to the low end of the board, where I'd rather have the pot be smaller as opposed to larger. I think this hand plays better as a check back as opposed to a flop stab. That said, I may start bluffing with it on later streets, depending on what comes out, as it doesn't have a ton of showdown value against higher aces. I do still beat stuff like Queen Jack, King 10 kind of, overcard Broadway hands that don't have any pairs yet. Maybe some merit just trying to check down against those. He probably has pretty much all the suited and offsuit versions of those. Turn comes, I don't have anything really going for this hand, at least not much. I've got an ace high, I've got, the ace high overcard, but it hits on a 4 to the straight. I've got ace high, kind of weak kicker, only the one overcard. I think it's okay to go ahead and fold this. If you wanted to peel once because you've got ace high and you could have all kinds of draws, I don't hate that either. I think it's probably pretty close and probably not massively profitable to call, but once again, I could probably be talked into calling that under the right circumstances. Under the gun, raises first in. We would normally not 3-bet ace-jack. It'd only be a bit outside, but this guy's been 60-40 over the first orbit, and he's going in and raising again. We've got some fish in the blinds I'm not that scared of, a short stack on the button, and another player that hasn't been particularly active, at least not with 3-betting. So I'm going to go ahead and expand my range, primarily because this guy's been on the loose side, and also because the other players behind me don't scare me that much as far as a potential, cold 4-bet goes. So I think it's okay to do this and try to get heads up against this guy that's been a bit loose or force him out of the pot with a range that's too weak. Upper right-hand table, blind down blind. I folded 6-7 offsuit. That would be a standard open for me, blind down blind, but I'm playing against a guy that's been loose, aggressive. He's liable to call plenty pre-flop, perhaps too much, maybe 3-bet me quite a bit. I actually deviated and got tighter as opposed to looser in that spot because this player behind me has been so loose. I'm not so much worried about him 3-betting me off of the hand, but I am worried he's going to call with a ton and make me play 7 high out of position, with an offsuit hand that just isn't going to play that well. So I think it's okay to fold that. Upper left-hand table, blind down blind. Queen 6 is a very standard defense against a 3x open. Queen 6 suited, that is. Queen 6 offsuit, I think I would just put in the muck. Now here we've got, in overcards, some backdoor spades. There's some cards that give us backdoor straight draws or gut shots. I'm just going to go ahead and stab this for half pot. I think that's a very reasonable hand to stab with the backdoor equity that we're talking about. Be betting most of my 9x for value and to deny equity from random overcards. I think I'd probably be checking back stuff like 7x. 8-8 I think would be pretty close. I could see checking that or betting that. I would probably even bet the 8-8 for the same reason I'm betting most of my 9x. The turn comes, an offsuit jack. We do not pick up any equity. If this was a hand like Queen 8 or Queen 10, I would probably go ahead and keep betting it. The Queen 6, having not picked up any draws, not having any blockers to the straight that's out there now, I think it's okay to go ahead and check this. Try to peel my queen to bluff catch or get some thin value on the river, or perhaps go ahead and try to get a bet in and move him off a hand on the river myself later on. In fact, I think that's exactly what I'd do if he checks to me. I could have some ace-x in my range here that played this way. Some of it would bet the flop. When he bets into me, however, I've only got the queen high, it's just going to be okay to go ahead and fold this. It's probably not a very strong line. It's probably over bluff, which means there's some merit to bluff raising. I would prefer to have either an 8 or 10 in my range to do that. I'd probably do it with some kind of the weaker 8s or 10s that had some showdown value, like maybe a hand like 7-8 or 7-10 that perhaps checked back the turn and now is too weak to bluff catch, with it being fourth pair. I think that would be the best candidate for a bluff raise. Queen 6 is just going to go in the muck, though. Lower left-hand table, we'll open ace-queen offsuit from middle position, but we're going to fold 9-7 suited from middle position in the upper right-hand table. And in that blind on blind, the check call, check bet line from regs is a little bit overbluffed. That sizing is also a decent bit overbluffed. I think I would probably go ahead, and the ace river overcard is also overbluffed. So there's plenty of reason to bluff raise in that particular spot. If I've got a combo a bit more suited to doing it. The combo I got did not lend well to it, but some combos would, and the scenario does. Upper left-hand table, we face a cutoff open. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet with ace-9 suited, and it's towards the bottom of our 3-bet range. You got a 10 or 11% 3-bet range there. Suited broadways, pocket 7s are better. Maybe some like ace-9, king-9, 10-9 suited type hands. A couple suited wheel aces, and then ace-king, ace-queen, king-queen. A range like that's a pretty reasonable 3-bet range against a standard cutoff open. Upper left-hand table, we're going to open the ace-3 suited from the cutoff. Lower left-hand table doesn't seem to be particularly weak or fishy as of right now, or some of the other tables have shown some promise, so I think I can go ahead and shuffle that out and find a better one. We'll open ace-5 offsuit from the button, the lower left-hand table. Middle position, facing under the gun 3x. We're just going to fold the jack-9 suited, a little bit too weak to put in our 3-bet range. We're not going to be cold calling anything in that spot, especially against a raise first in as large as 3x. Lower left-hand table, we'll open ace-9 suited from the cutoff. That's, of course, very standard, and something like a 28% raise first in range from the cutoff seems appropriate, absent reason to deviate. So we'll start with that. We get 3-bet by the big blind here, a pretty reasonable size, a 4.5x size. This should probably be a fold, even if we think the player is sufficiently aggressive to defend solver-approved ranges against a pool that shows a bit more tendencies towards being passive with their 3-betting. We'll probably go ahead and actually defend slightly tighter, but either way, we're going to fold ace-9 suited. That's probably just outside the range of hands I think we should be defending versus a 3-bet there for that size and that formation. I'd probably be defending something like, most if not all pairs, all suited broadways, a couple suited wheel aces, in most suited connectors. I'd 4-bet queens plus, ace-king suited, ace-king offsuit could go either way. We're going to open ace-3 suited under the gun on the lower right-hand table. We're going to fold ace-10 facing a raise first in on the upper right-hand table. He's playing 89-67 over 9 hands and sizes his 3-bet as a min raise. I think it's safe to say this player playing in about a 50 blind stack is a recreational player. We can go ahead and tag him as such right now. And we're going to be defending that min 3-bet. Oh, we have the overcaller over here as well from the small blind. We're going to be coming along with pretty much everything given the price that we're given, except for the stuff that we 4-bet. Queens plus ace-king for sure. I think I would also 4-bet jacks against that guy. The sizing is the interesting question. I'm not sure that I can 4-bet small against that guy, given that he's only got 50 blinds and that much money is already in the pot, even though it's only 5. I guess I could 4-bet to about 14, 15 blinds and in theory have some folds. I guess in theory I could even have ace-queen offsuit as a bluff in that particular range, although I wouldn't want to be too bluff-heavy because I think the player just does too many silly things. Against the pot size bet, we're just going to go ahead and fold with the bottom pair and the backdoor flush draw. But yeah, pre-flop, we call everything that we don't 4-bet. We're going to 4-bet to get it in with jacks plus and ace-king. And I guess the only real question left in my mind is, do I have 4-bet bluffs like ace-queen offsuit that actually fold to a jam, or do I just go ahead and call that and take the flop and don't even have any 4-bet bluffs in my range? You know, I like the idea of always having at least some possible 4-bets unless the sizing doesn't permit it whatsoever. But I also don't like the idea of 4-bet folding ace-queen to a guy that's that loose, that wacky, playing in a 50-blind stack. So I'm not quite sure what I would do if I was holding ace-queen. I think that's the toughest decision about what I do with my range at that point. I think everything else is pretty straightforward. The only question is, do I have 4-bet bluffs or not? I guess I could also use a weaker offsuit ace. I could use like my weakest offsuit ace, like ace-10 offsuit as my 4-bet fold. I could put ace-queen offsuit in the call range because I can call with that. I think I like that better. I think that's what I would do. That way I've got some 4-bet bluffs. I can justify the fact that my range has a semblance of balance. It still has good removal, similar to ace-queen does, just ace-10 instead, but I can put ace-queen, which is a little bit too good to 4-bet and fold in that particular scenario, into a calling range and play post-flop with it. I think that's what I would like in that scenario. Against that weird, wacky player who's now quit us and left. Unfortunately, we'd like him to stay. Got a recreational player, presumed rec, limping the cutoff over here. He's playing a little bit short. Queen Jack offsuit is kind of on the cusp of hands I would either raise up or limp in. I'm fairly reserved, isolating out of the blinds, probably a little bit more so than the pool is. So I think I'll go ahead and just limp the Jack Queen offsuit, the Queen Jack offsuit. But if you wanted to raise that, I think it's pretty close. I don't have a problem with that either. Let's see here. I stabbed tons of my range on this turn, but this is a fine candidate to deviate and not do that just because it doesn't really fold out kings. I don't want to get raised off the hand when I've got the gut shot, the decent flush draw. I can call most rivers regardless of what peels off. You know, I can check call and even check call twice in a lot of cases if need be. I think it's okay to check this particular hand, even though I am stabbing that turn pretty aggressively after the pot is limp pre-flop and checks through on the flop. But just because I have so much showdown value without being a true value bet, you know, where I was looking to get a bunch of money in over multiple streets, now that it checked around twice, I think it's going to be just fine to go ahead and try to get some value out of my second pair. You can call by weird random 9s, 7s, pocket pairs, ace high, worse queens. I think value betting here is completely standard, straightforward, and, you know, and almost even mandatory. You really ought to be doing it. Ran into queen 2, which rivered a second pair in the big blind, got in for free. Well, not the end of the world. Can open queen 5 suited from the button on the upper left-hand table. Lower right-hand table, blind on blind, we face a 3x open. King deuce suited is going to be a hand we continue with. I throw a few of these like low-suited kings, aces, queens into the 3-bet range, but I'm just going to go ahead and flat call this one. Gets the 3x open on the big blind. From middle position, we're just going to go ahead and flat the 7s. Upper left-hand table, we're going to range bet on the 7-4 deuce rainbow. Going to check range lower left-hand table on 10-8-7. And now that he actually checks back the flop on 10-8-7, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start overbetting. If he's sitting on some kind of slow-played hand, he's got some kind of draw he wants to continue with, or he's got a 10 that checked back the flop, I can get a lot of value from that. I want to start getting money in with my underfull quickly. I'm going to fold against that half-pot continuation bet blind on blind in the lower right-hand table. I could be doing that on the lower left-hand table with 9x, a lot of Jack X, especially like a hand like Jack Queen that's got real good removal to the trip 10s. I can do it with trip 10s and my underfulls. And I'm probably not really betting too many worse hands than trip 10s for value. So given that my value range is so polarized to big hands or just draws to big hands would be the bluffs, draws to straights essentially. I think it's good to use a value bet or an overbet, in that particular scenario. Cutoff raise first in. We're on the button. I'm playing 3-bet or fold. 5s is probably just outside my 3-bet range. I probably 3-bet maybe 6s or better here. You know, if you wanted to flat call this on the button, you could talk me into that some. I mostly just stay away from it, absent some real unusual circumstances. But, you know, calling is not terrible there. You know, if you put that into a 3-bet or fold range, that's probably also a little on the loose side, but defensible. Lower right-hand table, we raise first in with Jack-9 offsuit. We check range on the Queen-9 deuce two-tone board. Lower left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and open the pocket 8s from the cutoff. And that blind bat on the lower right-hand table, we now have third pair in the open-ended straight draw. That's actually a prime hand to check just because we have so much equity to check call with and some short-on value with our 9. We don't really fold out too much in the way of queens, too much in the way of 10s. You know, I guess in theory we value bet against a few draws, but by and large I'd rather induce bluffs from his total air or draws themselves that should also be betting. Now on the river, we don't really have too much we can get called with by value betting, and I'd much rather let his random ace high, random high card type hands decide they need to bluff and just try to snap it off with my 9. Lower left-hand table, blind on blind, 3x open, Jack-8 offsuits towards the bottom of our calling range, but a pretty standard call. We're going to go ahead and snap off this river stab, just like we tried to set up, get, you know, beat 6 high. You know, I very much like inducing the bluff from that spot just because we don't really get called by too much that we beat. And he's got all kinds of weird high card hands like that that really have to bluff. They just can't show down 6 high. So I think that's the way to go there. Lower left-hand table, we flop top 2. We're going to go ahead and stab for half pot. And we're going to fold 8-9 suited on the button facing a raise first in. Okay, turn is interesting on the lower left-hand table in that he probably shouldn't be too strong, check calling the flop and then checking to us on the turn. I'm trying to think what we have in the way of big hands. We could have 8s and 6s, you know, in some 2-pair hands like the Jack-8s, Jack-6 suited, 8-6 suited. I think I can actually go ahead and value bet this, or over bet this rather. Just because I'm not expecting him to have very many nut hands in a check call check line as well. You know, I don't have jacks. I don't necessarily have pocket deuces very much. Maybe I stab the flop with those some. But I'm decent here in the nut and balance as far as it goes, just because of the way he's played on the flop and on the turn. He does not buy into my turn over bet. He goes ahead and check calls a second time. I guess in theory, Ace-Jack could be playing this way and could call down another barrel. That said, I think I can still get hero called, especially in these blind-on-blind spots by hands that are worse than Jack-8 by a decent bit. Lots of one-pair hands, especially one-pair Jack hands, could do this. If he's sitting on some kind of ace-high nut flush draw, that probably also hero calls me. I don't want to use the overbet size here. I want to use a more standard 2/3-ish type size for my value bet, which is what I'm going to use with the Jack-8 and see if I can get called by one of those hands I was thinking about in his range. All right, that worked out too. Let's take a look and see what he called with. And he had Jack-7, so he check called 3 times with the top pair with the Jack. That's not entirely unreasonable, especially if he thinks I'm going ham in these blind battles, which I very well could be. I often will be. A lot of players will. And it seems like the blind battles players are starting to get a bit more sticky from these out-of-position spots, thinking the in-position player just starts going nuts on the blind battles, which is not entirely unreasonable. I mean, his hand is only a bluff catcher, but it's not unreasonable to call bluff catchers in a formation in a line that does have a decent degree of bluffs. So I don't hate his play. 3-bet in position, lower right-hand tab. We're just going to go ahead and muck the ace-5. We're going to go ahead and expand our range and open 7-6 offsuit on the button. We got a new player we don't know too much anything about, but the pool tends to be a bit on the passive side, and the other player has been nitty, hasn't played a hand through 8 hands so far in the big blind, so I think it's okay to go ahead and expand there. No reason to think these guys are particularly loose or aggressive. However, this player being a reg could be very pocket pair heavy, and that means this his range is actually pretty strong against my hand on this particular board if he is pocket pair heavy. He has the hand like 8 or 9s, he has an overpair. If he has 7s, 5s, or 3s, he has a set, and 6s and 4s are gut shots. Granted, I beat those. I want to be betting some of my 6x and checking some of my 6x back that's got some showdown value. I think this is actually a fine hand to go ahead and check back. The downside is I let overcards get a chance to peel on me for free, which isn't great, but it's also not the end of the world. Doesn't happen as often as you think, and you often induce bluffs from the missed overcards by checking back as well. So I think it's okay to go ahead and check that combo. It's probably pretty close, and betting to protect it from overcards is also a reasonable approach. If it was just against the big blind, I think I like betting a lot better. Granted, I would range bet anyway in such a spot, but also because this guy is weighted more towards pairs and he can have overpairs and boats on the flop, I think my hand is a little bit weaker than it may look by the fact that it has top pair. We'll just go ahead and call that with trips and the gut shot. You know, I'm not too worried that he has me beat with that small bet on the turn. If he's got a good trip sevens or he's got, you know, some kind of boat, I think he should be betting a bit larger just to get more value in there. I'm going to go ahead and try to value bet this again, try to get hero called by any one pair hand. Once again, I'm not going to overbet because I don't want to force him into calling me just with strong trips and boats kind of thing. I just want to use a 2/3 type size and try to get hero called by any one pair hand. Lower right-hand table, blind on blind, will open 8-7 offsuit. And under-repping my hand on the flop, you know, by not betting the 7 probably makes him less inclined to believe I have a 7 when we get to the river the way that we did and bet it. So he called me with 5-deuce suited, which is not terribly unreasonable. You know, once again, it's okay to call with bluff catchers. I just happen to have value that time. Lower left-hand table will open queen 10 from the cutoff, and we're going to fold the lower right-hand table 8-7 suited or 8-7 offsuit and the blind on blind facing the 3-bet. Lower left-hand table, we're going to open queen 10 suited for middle position. Face a pretty decent-sized 3-bet, almost a 5x 3-bet from the small blind. This formation is really not that loose either. First of all, in solver world, it's not that loose, even in an equilibrium type setup. The pool actually bets a decent 3-bets a decent bit tighter even than solver would in these, you know, blind versus early position spots based on what I've seen. So I think it's going to be okay to go ahead and fold this given that larger sizing, which leads us to be less inclined to call in the pool's tendency towards being passive. It's pretty close. At equilibrium would be a call. Even against the pool, it looks like, as I look at this a bit closer, it's a call. It's kind of on the cusp. I'm actually going to go ahead and not follow my first instinct and defend this against the 3-bet. But like I said, it's very, very close. If you wanted to be a bit on the snug side and fold it, I wouldn't mind that either. The player has also 3-bet already, you know, 1 time out of 6, now 2 times out of 7. He's heavily 3-betting some. He's clearly a reg using that small 1/3 sizing, especially with some rounding there, that or lack of rounding that tells me that he's not even rounding off the blinds. He's clearly using software to help him do that, so he's letting me know he's a reg. We can go ahead and call with that bottom pair and the gut shot. I don't think there's too much merit in bluffing this particular hand. I'm trying to think what I would be betting here. I mean, I've got Queen Jack, I've got Queen Jack, and I've got 10s, and I've probably got a lot of Ace King offsuit as well. Those are going to be my bets. I'm trying to think what I have in the way of draws that want to be betting here. I don't really have flush draws that haven't paired up. I've got some Ace X flush draws essentially. I think those primarily check back. I'm really not going to have very many bluffs on this turn. It's probably not completely correct, but I don't want to turn this hand into a bluff as well because I'm not going to fold out much of anything except maybe pocket jacks, pocket queens, and maybe not even to 1 barrel. Now I don't beat any Jack X. I don't beat any sets like aces, kings, queens, 10s. I don't beat any Ace King, Ace Queen, Ace 10. This hand is not nearly as strong as it might seem being two-pair, given that it's a very small two-pair and a lot of these larger two-pair combos are out there. I'm actually just going to go ahead and show this down. Yeah, against Ace-King. You know, if I hit the king, I'm of course going to value bet as I've got the nuts, but I think it's okay to not get too loose and try to get thin value there. I would value bet some two-pair in that spot. You know, my Ace-King or my Ace-Queen, I'd probably be betting. But a small two-pair when all the larger two-pair on all the sets, and there's lots of different ways you could have a jack for that four straight that being out there, I think it's just fine to take your showdown and hope he's got smaller pocket pairs, suited connectors, something like that, something where you actually are good, but that won't call you. Cutoff opens for 2.5x. We're going to defend the big blind with Jack-King offsuit. Turn checks through, or flop checks through rather. The turn is the Jack of Spades with the double flush draw out there. I'm going to go ahead and use the overbet size here with top pair second kicker on a board that's very, very wet and dry. There's all kinds of gut shots, pairs plus gut shots, two different flush draws, a variety of open-ended straight draws out there. I think I want to use the larger size here. Now on the river, it comes the six of hearts. It completes the flush draw. However, I do have blockers to it. It doesn't really complete straights that weren't already there, 8-9. I think the move actually is betting small for value, especially that I block hearts, try to get called by a worse jack, some kind of middling 10x like 10-9. I'd much rather do that than check call or check fold. I can certainly fold to a raise. He instantly folds, so he was on something weak. It also makes my my river bluffs where I follow through have a lot more teeth to them, where I can actually have a lot of value in there to help justify it. So if he wants to start hero calling me very liberally in that line, he's going to get burned by some thinner value bets too. And I'm not expecting a significant number of raises, especially bluff raises with worse hands that are making me fold the better hands. So I think it's okay to go ahead and value bet that on the thin side. Okay, we've got an under-the-gun limp from a very likely recreational player playing 70-0 with limps over his first 11 hands. We get an isolation raise from the button. We're going to treat this, because of the stack sizes involved, as almost like a cold 4-bet or fold. We're going to be stacking off with queens plus ace-king, but I don't need to use king-queen offsuit in my bluffing range. Upper right-hand or lower right-hand table, 3x open from middle position. We're going to go ahead and 3-bet. Probably about an 8.5% range, which is going to include pocket queens. Upper left-hand table, we're going to fold against the cutoff open with 10-jack offsuit on the button. We would certainly raise that first thin if it was folded around to us, but we're not going to get involved in a 3-bet or fold spot from the button against a 3x open with a hand as marginal as Jack-10 off. Let's see. Players have been passive in the blind so far. We can go ahead and open some, semi-connected trash on the button, the 9-6 offsuit. Upper right-hand table, we've got a small blind poster behind us. We're going to go ahead and open for pot with more or less our standard opening range, maybe slightly tighter, but more or less a standard middle position opening range of which pocket nines is clearly going to be in that. Whenever there's posters or dead money or limpers, I like to use a pot size open or raise or isolation, if you will, as opposed to a more standard 2.5x open, just to account for the extra dead money in the pot and adjust the odds the blinds are being given to come along and play. Upper left-hand table, ace-king offsuit is a standard open from middle position. Lower right-hand table, the middle position opens 3x. Queen-10 offsuit is probably a little outside of our defense range anyway, which gets even more true when there's a small blind overcaller. So we're going to go ahead and fold that. This table also seems to be fairly reg heavy at this point. Nobody seems to be blatantly, obviously a recreational player, so I'm going to go ahead and shuffle that table out. On the upper left-hand table, we have a 3-bet in position. We normally are going to 4-bet or fold with ace-king, or 4-bet to call off rather with queens plus and ace-king. Given we have an overcaller here, but the guy is fishy and probably has all kinds of nonsense in his range, I'm not gonna get any tighter. I'm not worried about him having a strong hand. If anything, I think he's probably got plenty of stuff that I beat, and certainly not dominating me very, very frequently at all. He's going to do that way too much. I'm just going to go ahead and jam all in, as I really can't 4-bet and fold given his stack size behind me. Lower left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and range bet after raising first in with the ace-9 suited from under the gun on the king-king-7 two-tone board. We get check raise small. I'm not inclined to believe he's super strong here, but we just don't have any real way out of this hand in the event he does have something. If I had backdoor flush draws, even some backdoor straight draw kind of hands, I'm going to be calling a lot. I'm going to be calling, my pocket pairs because they can, turn a river full houses. My trip kings are obviously coming along. My full houses are obviously coming along. I'm going to play my entire continuation range for a call. Flush draws are obviously coming along. Ace-9 suited just doesn't have enough going for it, though, with no backdoors. So I'm going to go ahead and fold this. Although I don't think that's a particularly strong situation given his small sizing. But I just don't have the right ammunition to come along and fight back against it right there. Got a button limper, the upper left-hand table, small blind completes. We'll check in with ace-8 offsuit, just a bit too weak to be isolating up there in that spot. Second pair top kicker, we get bet into by the small blind. We need to call that at least once. I was really preferring to see a check there, allow me to check my range, but second pair top kicker could be even ahead of some hands he's betting. He could be betting worse eights or deuces or various draws. He continues betting. He hasn't been particularly aggressive right now. The deuce means if he was betting any of his pairs in the flop, those are now trips. I am still ahead of various draws. Backdoor flush draws, now turn flush draws that could keep betting, or the straight draws are obviously still draws. However, if he's got a 10x or a 2x, I'm just drawing so thin. I think it's going to be okay to kind of fold this, where I don't think players are too aggressive in these limp pots here from the small blind. If I call the turn, I'm putting myself into a spot where I'm going to have to go ahead and call, the blank rivers when I may already be drawing quite thin. So I think it's okay to get out of hand a street too early as opposed to a street too late. But I'm sure that is debatable, and some of you may disagree, and that's entirely fine. Like I said, it's not crystal clear that the fold there is correct to me. I think it's probably on the cautious side. We checked in from the big blind against, this is a limping player. You know, we're going to check our range on that King, Jack, Queen two-tone flop. Now we've hit the straight, so we're going to go ahead and start betting out into this pot. We'd be betting tons of stuff. We'd be betting our ace-x, our 10x. We'd be betting our club draws, our heart draws. Probably be checking my 1 and 2 pair type hands. In theory, I could be stabbing with my total error just to barrel turn, barrel river, but I think I might just be a bit more passive on the 4 straight when it's very easy for somebody to have some kind of random 10 or even some 1 or 2 pair type hand that just isn't going to fold. So I think I might not go hog wild on this particular board with my error, but I would be betting my straights, my gut shots, and my flush draws for sure. Upper left-hand table, we open ace-10 offsuit on the button. We have a recreational player call from the big blind who donks into us for half pot on jack-9-8 two-tone. When we have the open-ended straight draw, we're going to go ahead and flat call that. I'd probably be flat calling more or less my entire continued range. If you wanted to go ahead and raise your big hands, I wouldn't hate that either. But I kind of like letting them blast off with this bluffs into my strong hands and also keep my weaker marginal hands and draws protected by my strong hands. So I'm going to go ahead and call. Open-ended straight draw, ace-high overcard. That's probably also a good call-down hand. If it hits, is going to be another continue here for about a 75% pot bet. He checks to me. We've got about 2x pot left. He probably isn't super strong. We're going to go ahead and just move him all in. I'd be betting a little over 2x pot all in with my bluffs and my made hands like my sets, my straights that I flopped. And I just am not that convinced that when a recreational player leads into me, especially for a little bit on the smaller side on the flop, but then checks the river, that he's going to be all that strong. The overcard could even scare him off a hand as strong as some kind of pair of jacks that was betting the flop and turn. That's probably about the worst case scenario for me if he has that and manages to call it. It is going to be tough for him to call down with the pair of jacks against that, little over 2x pot overbet all in. I have good removal to the straight. Like I said, that overcard probably scares him, and he often has a lot of weaker stuff in his hands, like even weaker pairs that he was donking with, or some kind of pair plus draw kind of hand that doesn't love the way the river blanked out. So I think it's okay to go ahead and jam him all in there as a bluff. And he folded pretty quickly, so he probably had something relatively weak, which I thought he would have a decent percentage of the time. Lower left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and open blind on blind with ace-8 offsuit, but we're going to go ahead and fold it when we get 3-bet. New table with some guys playing shorter. That looks promising. We're going to go ahead and keep that one in to fill out the 4-table rotation. And I got a 60 blind player, a 30 blind player, a 10 blind player. That's a very promising start to that table based on what I've seen so far. Upper right-hand table, we'll open King 10 offsuit from middle position. Lower right-hand table, we have a suspected recreational player limping the cutoff. We're going to go ahead and isolate up from the blinds with our pocket eights. This is probably the worst pair I would isolate with, right around the cusp. I think I would probably check in with the sevens, or limp in with the sevens. 9-4 deuce rainbow, we're going to go ahead and range bet that board small. He calls. I don't love the ace for my particular hand. I do have a lot of ace-x in my range that played that way. I'd probably keep betting with my pocket nines to screw over any ace that, you know, limped and called the flop. In my strong aces, I think I'm going to check most of the other stuff. In looking for some draws, I guess I just need removal to the ace is probably the best thing I can do as far as draws go. I don't have anything in the way of gut shots or anything like that. There's no flush draw out there. So I probably barrel with hands like Jack 10, Queen Jack, because it blocks the most likely aces, his, you know, ace 10, ace Jack, ace Queen. And he was sitting on pocket jacks all along, which is a very silly, odd way to play those, but I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Recreational players do silly, odd things that don't make sense. You know, had he raised that hand pre-flop, he would have gotten me to 3-bet him from the blinds. He could have called me. On that same board, I would have also range bet, at which point he could have called, or he could have raised me and forced me off the hand, or called and gotten that hand to showdown the same way as played. He would have won a much larger pot against me, but by playing at passive preflop and limping, he ended up winning a lot less of my money. So his mistake is my gain. Lower right-hand table, we're going to open ace-queen suited from the cutoff. Lower left-hand table, we get a short-stacked player opens 3x on the cutoff, and another short-stacked player calls the 3x open on the button. We're sitting here with king-queen. I would often 3-bet this, but given the stack sizes and the raise size I'm going to be using, I don't want to 3-bet and then have to fold too many hands to a jam. I'm going to put this in my calling range instead and be a lot more snug with my 3-bet range. You know, 3-bet, I think I could 3-bet 10s or better to get them in. Normally it would be jacks or better from a cutoff open, but against a player that's short, I can expand that a bit wider. You know, and then I would have some bluffs mixed in as well, but I'll put king 9 in the calling range pre-flop. We're going to check to him out of position and check call a roughly half-size pot bet on the flop. He checks the turn. Now the only question is, do I try to value bet this or do I try to induce a bluff? I think I want to value bet this. You know, I mean, I'm gonna bet into some better kings occasionally or some janky 2-pair type hands that found a way there. But I can get hero called by 10x or, you know, pocket nines, weird random pairs. I want to be value betting on the thin side whenever it's kind of close. I doubt he's going to raise me with the bluff very often. You know, I could have Queen Jack here if I didn't 3-bet it pre-flop. I could have some other straight draws that bricked out. When he goes all in, though, I think that's got to be a fold. Upper left-hand table, we open under the gun. We get 3-bet by the small blind, which should be reasonably tight, but he uses such a small size that there's really not much else to do but go ahead and defend this. Call and take a flop. The 8-9-6 two-tone board, and he checks. He probably has a lot of cards that don't love this. A lot of his overpairs are going to bet as opposed to check. Some people will check range on a board like this, but I don't know that he's doing that. We have 2 overcards, the nut flush draw. You know, a back. We could bang off a runner to a jack high straight. He check calls me once. Now we have the open-ended straight draw. There's 4 to the straight out there. He leads into me. I was going to stab this, especially so deep, not being that worried about some kind of check raise all in that would be pretty suicidal without the 7. I can have pocket 7s or queen jack here. I'm going to go ahead and peel this, especially with all my equity, my open straight draw, my nut flush draw. River comes the king. We've got that. We've got the hearts out there now. I think I really need to find a way to go ahead and bet this. I'm trying to think what I would do. With Queen Jack, I think I would be going all in, so I think that's what I want to do here as well. You know, I could have also banged off backdoor hearts. I don't believe he's going to check the flush if he bangs off backdoor hearts himself. I think it might be too easy for him to call down some kind of smaller bet. You know, if I bet more like 2/3, you know, he could get sticky with some kind of pair that just thinks I'm full of crap. You know, I'm not really trying to value bet thin there. I'm only going to be value betting the backdoor heart hands, some 7x. You know, like if I guess my pocket 7s that made the straight on the turn, or Queen Jack that made the straight on the turn. So I'm pretty nutted there with my value range. So I don't see any reason to be betting small. I'm not even. And maybe, I guess, some of my sets I could think about betting the 2/3 type sizing, but for the most part, I'm going to be betting backdoor flushes, you know, Queen Jack and 7x straight type hands. Given that that's my value range, I want to be using that large size, put his middling 1 pair type hands into a terrible spot. A hand like Ace Jack with that spade draw that bricked out, but it's got blockers to the nut straight. I think that's a very reasonable hand to go ahead and put in my bluffing range, so I'm happy to just move him all in and steal that pot from him. Lower right-hand table, we can open Queen 9, blind on blind. Going to open Ace Jack on the cutoff in the lower right-hand table. Get called by a weak recreational player from the big blind on the Jack 6-5 two-tone board. We're going to go ahead and range bet small. Given that we have top pair, top kicker against a rec type player in the big blind, if you want to start sizing up to get more money in, I really can't argue with that. That's certainly reasonable as well. Upper left-hand table, we're going to open the 10-9 suited from under the gun. Upper left-hand table, the cutoff opens 2.5x. We're going to be defending this hand until that 3-bet came in from the button. Now with the button in there, this becomes a cold 4-bet or fold situation from our big blind, and 9-8 suited is a bit too weak to have in that range, so we go ahead and fold it. Lower right-hand table, we checked in against the button limper, and the flop checks through on deuce, deuce, deuce. Now with the 10, we're going to go ahead and start stabbing. And actually now we're just going to check and try to show it on our king high. Upper right-hand table, we're going to 3-bet against that middle position open. Probably a bit on the tighter side because he's been so tight, but we're still going to 3-bet ace-king. Probably only got like a 7% 3-bet range here. You know, something more like an under-the-gun type range. Or actually even more like a 5% type range. We get 4-bet. This player's been so passive that I feel like that's probably strong, but ace-king suited is just really too strong to be folding to a 4-bet without a ton of information to the contrary. 13-11 with no 3-bets over 40 hands is reasonably close. I'm not going to be that shocked if I jam into aces or kings here, but I think this hand is just too strong to do anything but just get all in. We're only 100 blinds deep. It's nothing particularly crazy, so we just need to ship that in. And that's why you don't second-guess yourself with a hand like ace-king, even if you think the guy is tight and nitty. He still has 4-bet folds in his range, which he did right there. Lower right-hand table, we open queen-jack suited on the button. We face a call from the big blind, who then checks to us on jack 6-3 rainbow, so we're going to go ahead and range bet small. Lower left-hand table, 3x open for middle position. Jacks are probably, I don't want to 3-bet these and have to call off against that player over here, this short guy playing 30 blinds deep. I'm going to go ahead and use this as a flat. Lower right-hand table, we got called. He could be sitting on hands like 6s or 3s just as well as we can, given he could probably slow play the flop. I'm going to use, I'm trying to think if I really want to have an overbet size. I could also have 8s, but so could he as played. I'm going to use a smaller size with my top pair here. I'm not going to necessarily default to an overbet when I feel like he could be trapping some sets. Upper right-hand table, we're going to open ace-queen from the button. Lower left-hand table, we're going to stab after that flop checks through with our ace-10. Not so sure there's merit in trying to get a third barrel here because we could still be facing traps. He could have better jacks. I don't know that he calls with a ton of worse jacks. He does call with a couple, but I think he could actually be a bit stronger than we give him credit for here, even though that he's check called twice. I'm gonna err on the side of caution and check this queen jack back. Okay, and he's obviously a fish, which would change my calculus having now that I know that he's playing a hand like 4-2. I didn't know that he was a weak player when I made that river decision. Had I had that information at the time this guy was weak, I would have value bet that hand for a 2/3 type sizing. I don't know that he calls me down with that weak pair of rivered pair of 4s anyway. But I think the move is value bet once we have the information that that guy is kind of a weaker player. And we are going to go ahead and shut down the session after these orbits continue, or after these orbits complete, rather. can open 10-8 suited from the cutoff in the lower right-hand table. We're going to open Ace-Jack from the cutoff on the lower right-hand table. We're going to fold King-7 offsuit in the upper left-hand table against the raise. That weak-type player comes along from the small blind. Upper left-hand table is done. We've got a Jack-10 deuce two-tone flop. We again have top pair, top kicker against this guy. Going to go ahead and range bet small. Again, if you wanted to size up with top pair, top kicker against a perceived weak player, I've got no problem with that either. But definitely don't check this hand back on this board against this player. Definitely bet it. Turn is interesting. It puts a second flush draw out there with ace high. We have top two. He could have various ace X type hands, especially with flush draws that check called, you know, various ace X of spades. He could have lots of Jack X or 10X with gut shots. He can have King Queen. He probably has just as much King Queen as we do. Because of that, I'm going to use a smaller size. I also don't want to blow a hand like Jack Queen off with an overbet. I want to keep those in there. So I'm going to use that smaller size. And that's about it. The session is done. Went pretty well. We ended up winning about 3.5 buy-ins, so I'm pretty happy with the results. Hope you enjoyed watching the video. This is Charlie Murphy signing off.